If I only knew. By Wanderlove.
Chapter 2. Shmi Skywalker would have made a terrifying Jedi Knight, Obi-Wan decides a few hours after meeting the woman for the first time. She has handled their unexpected arrival with an unflappable serenity that would put Master Yoda to shame, one that Obi-Wan envies. They had arrived on her doorstep at dusk, Anakin a bouncing incandescent ball of tightly contained joy, and Obi-Wan a sleep-deprived and frazzled mess. After Anakin had explained that they were in the middle of an important pod racing season, Watto liked to gamble, and if Shmi was going to be sold to cover a debt, now would be the most likely time, the council had decided that heist was the best path forward. They were the only Jedi within a week's travel to Tatooine, and so they had immediately been granted an emergency cessation to their planned 2-week diplomatic tour of Ryloth. Obi-Wan's life since then had been equal parts strained pleasantries.
Your hospitality has no equal, Senator. Another situation has arisen in the Arrakis sector, and we are the only ones close enough to investigate.
And fruitless attempts to quell Anakin's rising excitement, while he was cheered to see such obvious, unfettered joy in his padawan.
Obi-Wan had feared what they would discover on Tatooine and sought to temper Anakin's expectations. Luckily, his fears had been assuaged the moment they had entered the slave quarters, and an old woman, Jira, he later learned, had guessed on seeing Anakin. "Shmi! Shmi! Shmi!" she had called. "Annie is back! Little Annie is back!" And a small olive-skinned woman stepped out of a dark doorway, eyes wide, but most importantly, physically whole and healthy. Anakin had nearly bowled her over to the ground in his excitement. Anakin's stream of chatter had hardly stopped from that moment until now, determined to share in exhaustive detail every single second of his adventure since leaving her embrace in Tatooine a year and a half earlier. Obi-Wan sits at Shmi's small table, carefully sipping at the water that Shmi had generously offered in a cracked clay cup. He listens to his Padawan's tales with half an ear and trades weary glances with Shmi across the table. Anakin sits between them, still talking, though he is beginning to droop with exhaustion. Obi-Wan waits patiently, having survived many a similar onslaught, and knows that he needs to be ready when... there it is! Obi-Wan darts forward to catch his slumping Padawan as he falls asleep between one breath and the next. Truly an impressive ability, even if it had nearly given Obi-Wan a heart attack the first time we witnessed it. Halfway through a story about his favorite kata practice room in the temple, his hands collide with Shmi's, who has assumed a similar position to stop Anakin's downward tilt out of the chair. They stare at each other, startled, Anakin suspended between them. Obi-Wan withdraws quickly and clasps his hands around his water cup. Shmi nods once and shakes Anakin halfway awake so that he can shuffle across the room to a sleeping pallet with her help. Obi-Wan should have insisted Shmi accept his help, he thinks, as he watches them with a frown. He has always dealt with these incidences by picking Anakin up and depositing him into the nearest bed. Much better for Anakin not to have to sleep and wake and sleep again. He hides his expression, bringing his cup back to his lips as Shmi rejoins him at the table. Despite the fact that Anakin is gone, she chooses to take the further possible seat from Obi-Wan, as if squaring off against him. They regard each other for one long moment.
"Anakin says you are here to free me,"
Shmi says finally. Obi-Wan waits for her to continue, but when nothing more is forthcoming, he steels himself and opens his mouth. "Yes, I apologize for the timing, but that is the Jedi Council, we did not know that you had not been freed. Once we were made aware, we were dispatched to Tatooine immediately."
"Qui-Gon Jinn promised to return and free me,"
Shmi says with a tilt to her head. She then glances back towards Anakin and the sleeping palace.
"Then again, he promised to train my son, so I suppose it is not the only promise he broke."
"Master Qui-Gon was killed shortly after leaving Tatooine," Obi-Wan responds quietly, resisting the urge to hunch his shoulders and ruin the image of a perfect Jedi. "With his dying breath, he begged me to train Anakin." Shmi looks startled and remorseful.
"My words were too bitter, forgive me. I made many assumptions," she continues in a far, far gentler tone. "I grieve with you."
Obi-Wan has heard similar words many times since Qui-Gon died, from Jedi and politicians alike, but unlike those other strangers, she seems to truly understand the meaning of those words.
Maybe it is because she is a slave and knows far too well what it is to lose one's friends to sudden and painful circumstances. He inclines his head, accepting the sentiment. In all honesty, I knew when Qui-Gon left that he would not be back to free me.
There's a certain weight to the word knew, and Obi-Wan spares a brief wondering at Shmi's midichlorian count. He should have freed you both while he was still on planet, Obi-Wan points out. The Jedi are not in the business of splitting up family, freeing only those that would be useful to us. It was part of the reason the Council assumed it goes against all mission protocol.
So he should have freed me and Annie both, but left his other family to rot? Do Jira and Kitzer count any less as his family, even though they are not related by blood? And even if you freed them, what about their families and their family's family? If one is enslaved, all are enslaved.
We do not think of it like that, Obi-Wan says, more surprised than anything else. He strokes his short beard. None of the other slaves we've freed have brought it up.
Jedi free slaves.
Shmi scoffs. Not many. Not enough, Obi-Wan admits. But if we happen to encounter them and we can do so without interrupting the mission or causing full-scale chaos, we are given full license to do so. We are not an army, despite what all the urban legends say. We simply do not have the numbers to launch a full-out attack on Hutt space. But we are taught that it is better to do something rather than nothing. To free one, even if we cannot free all.
Is all Shmi says, and Obi-Wan gets the distinct sense she disapproves. Then she waves a hand. While I appreciate the offer, I cannot accept.
I don't... What?
Shmi regards him evenly for a moment, eyes shadowed. Most of us are owned by the Hutts or their cronies, and those slaves are afforded little freedom of movement. My position is unique. As the slave of a junk dealer known for rare and hard-to-obtain parts, I am given a much longer leash. I go into the desert and bargain with Jawas. It is useful in certain situations.
Obi-Wan's breath catches, recognizing the trust it takes for her to imply such things. He is a virtual stranger, and she could get not only herself, but so many others in trouble.
Besides, she adds, baring her teeth, my freedom will be stolen, not bought. I was willing to bend for my son, but for myself, no. I won't let you give Watto a single credit for what is not his to begin with.
I think I understand.
Obi-Wan chooses his words carefully. He turns the problem over in his head, considering.
What if you were free, but appeared not to be?
What?
Anakin has told me of your slave chip. It would be difficult, and I am uncertain how long the ruse will last, but it is possible that we could disable your chip while maintaining the illusion that it is still active. In this way, you could continue your activities, but maintain an escape hatch of sorts. Should anything go wrong, I can leave you with the common credits, which should help as well.
Why? Shmi asks, sharp and disbelieving. From everything I've heard from you and Anakin, I cannot imagine your council would approve of you aiding a slave rebellion in this way.
Well, those are two different questions. To answer the latter, the council will definitely not approve. However, our mandate was to free you using the credits given. And from a certain point of view, that's exactly what I've done. Anything you do afterwards is fully your own choice, and really, after dealing with Anakin, the council really shouldn't have meant that Anakin Skywalker would settle down quietly and stop causing trouble. Shmi barks out a harsh laugh at that, surprised.
That's my Annie, she says fondly. But to the first part of my question, why would you do this?
Obi-Wan pauses, breathes, squirms a little inside. Anakin is a good student, he says eventually, struggling to maintain an even tone. Bright and quick and eager to prove himself. I can already see that he will be a great Jedi one day, greater than I have ever been. But I have also held him to his nightmares, and I fear what losing you to a slave master's angry beating or a hot execution would do to him. At least this way I can mitigate some of the risk.
You love him,
Shmi declares, her tone warm. Attachment is forbidden, Obi-Wan counters harshly. We have a strong bond, yes, but Jedi do not love.
Shmi agrees without really agreeing. Of course, I apologize. Would you like some tea?
Obi-Wan feels dizzy with whiplash from the sudden subject change, as if he has allowed Anakin to pilot their ship again. A mistake Obi-Wan had made once, and
only once! And a speeder right around Coruscant. Anakin might be a prodigy, but he had learned all of his tricks and skills from pod racing, and it shows.
Oh, well, I do enjoy a good cup of tea, he says. Shmi smiles mysteriously and begins bustling around the kitchen, carefully pouring boiling water over a mass of brown and red leaves stuffed in 2 cups. She brings the cups back over to the table, this time settling herself much closer to Obi-Wan, close enough to clasp his forearm, should she desire to do so. She watches Obi-Wan's face carefully as he blows on the burning hot liquid and takes a small, careful sip. He senses the tea is being tested. Flavor explodes across his tongue, smoky and warm. It is not like any tea that he has had before, and if he had been browsing at the market and had the chance to choose his own tea, he's not sure he would have picked this spicy blend. He had been raised on Coruscant his whole life. His taste buds tend firmly towards the bland, thank you very much. But now that he is here, savoring the rich scent and flavor, he finds he quite likes it.
It's very tasty, he ventures. I don't think I could knock it all back in one go. But it is a good choice to sip in small bits over a long meditation.
Shmi relaxes even further, smiling, and Obi-Wan knows that he has passed this test.
Tell me more of Annie and yourself, she says finally. I love him dearly, but he is not a talented storyteller. He likes to jump around too much.
Obi-Wan chuckles and begins a more detailed and linear recounting of their adventures since leaving Tatooine 18 months earlier. Anakin wakes with the first rays of the sun hours later. He yawns, looks at the now cool tea, and glances back to his mom, surprised. You gave him tzai? He asks. Shmi only raises an eyebrow as she glides around the tiny quarters, prepared for a full day of work. Obi-Wan gets a similar feeling to that which he experienced on Ryloth, though with less foreboding. He suspects that there is whole other conversation going on that he doesn't fully understand.
Of course I did, she replies easily. Obi-Wan tells me that you don't like the temple food and tea, that they're too plain for you. I'll give you some spices to take back so you can add them to your meals and to mix your own tzai.
Huh, is all Anakin says. There is definitely some subtext going on here that Obi-Wan doesn't understand, and he narrows his eyes in contemplation.
I have to go open up the store, Shmi adds. Obi-Wan will explain while I'm gone.
Anakin looks ready to protest, so Obi-Wan speaks up.
Peace, Padawan shall be free soon enough. We have a plan that we will need your help to implement some of the details. Shmi doesn't have the knowledge of force manipulation necessary for the execution, and I don't understand the mechanics well enough to know if it will work or not.
A plan! A plan! Anakin's enthusiasm bubbles up. He gives his mother a hug and graciously allows her to place a kiss on the crown of his head. Shmi disappears and Obi-Wan is left to sketch up an outline of the plan that he and Shmi stayed up half the night to flesh out. Truthfully, he is confident the plan will work. While he doesn't understand fully how the mechanics work, he understands enough and he is confident that Anakin can find a way around any unforeseen obstacles. He is more concerned with Anakin's reaction to the leaving Shmi behind on Tatooine part of the plan than he is with any of the actual details. You're just gonna leave Mom behind? Anakin questions, predictably.
It is your mother's choice, Obi-Wan reminds him. She wants to do this. She explained that she has certain responsibilities here.
Yeah, but it's super dangerous! If Watto or the Hutts find out that we've disabled their chip, they'll hurt her.
Your mother is aware of the risk and is more than willing to do it anyways, Obi-Wan replies. Sometimes the people we care for will make choices we'd rather they didn't. All we can do is offer what support we can and trust in the Force. We must let them go to forge their own path.
But why can't we just take her back to Coruscant with us? You know that's safer.
No, Anakin, Obi-Wan interrupts the dad harshly. We would be violating your mother's right to determine her own life. We would be kidnapping her. It would make us little better than slavers. I don't know your mother very well, but that would betray everything she believes in, and I don't think she would forgive either of us.
Anakin sits stewing in his thoughts, and Obi-Wan leaves him to it for several long minutes. You said she'd have a comm, right? Anakin says, finally, slowly. So I could check in on her, make sure she's safe.
Obi-Wan had been envisioning the comm more as a resource of last resort, one Shmi would only use in the case she needed their help to make a hasty escape. But now that Anakin has raised the possibility, Obi-Wan is loath to take that connection away from him. Of course, Obi-Wan says, the words slipping out before he can fully consider the consequences. He winces eternally. He knows he is absolutely terrible at telling Anakin no, but he really didn't need to add yet another example of his obvious failures as a teacher. He also can't fully regret the action when he sees how it reassures Anakin.
And she'd be helping the other slaves,
Anakin states, growing more excited and warming to the idea.
She'll be a true Skywalker.
Obi-Wan cocks his head first. Oh, Skywalker? He queries.
They're just stories we tell each other.
Anakin seems taken aback and a little reluctant to share, but he continues when he feels Obi-Wan's curious, encouraging nudge across the bond.
Akreth the Skywalker often tricks the masters. He'll take on a disguise and operate right under their noses, stealing freedom for the slaves. They're my and Mom's favorite stories. I know that's why she chose the name Skywalker when she had a chance.
It sounds like your mother chose her name well, Obi-Wan says, clasping Anakin's shoulder again. I'd very much like it if you told me the full stories one day. Anakin looks terribly hopeful and happy at that statement.
I will, he promises, over a cup of tzai.
Good, Obi-Wan responds with a nod. He wants to lighten the heavy air and can't resist a small jab. Of course, these stories of a Skywalker pulling off tricks and adventurous feats underneath the watchful eye of a group of masters. That wouldn't happen to be inspiration for any of the antics you pulled at the temple now, would it?
Anakin smiles broadly and giggles. Maybe, he admits, still laughing.
Obi-Wan laughs too and ruffles his hair. There's a small scuffle as Anakin attempts to escape, and when it ends, they are both far better focused and in tune with the Force. It makes Obi-Wan content. Okay, young Padawan of mine, let us discuss this plan of ours. We have only a few days to pull it off, Obi-Wan says as he and Anakin settle in.
In the end, pulling off their heist is surprisingly easy.
Yes, there's a brief moment of tension where Obi-Wan has to slip into Watto's shop, find and grab the transmitter so that Anakin can reprogram the original, and then replace the newly tampered-with unit as if nothing changed. However, the fact that Watto has never seen Obi-Wan before and knows nothing of his connection to Anakin makes it a lot easier. Why, Obi-Wan is just an interested off-world traveler wandering around the shop, not scoping it out, not at all. For insurance, Obi-Wan has agreed to try to disable the explosive component of Shmi's chip, so that even if Watto realizes what has happened, he won't be able to regain control. They must leave the chip and its tracking properties intact so that Watto doesn't realize anything is wrong. But the dead man switch is what really prevents Shmi from being truly free. He is now regretting that agreement as he looms over Shmi, who is splayed down on her stomach across the table. His lineage is not known for their healing competency, and such a delicate, potentially disastrous operation should really be handled by a temple healer. But they don't have a temple healer. All they have is Obi-Wan, and so he will have to make it work. Do or do not. There is no try, says an annoying yodeling voice in his head. He runs his hands over her body, searching for the bit of mechanical engineering embedded in organic flesh, the whisper of, I should not be here, that he knows should be somewhere. Anakin stands at the head of the table, holding his mother's hand and fiercely whispering to her in some language Obi-Wan doesn't recognize. He has been instructed to run if something goes wrong, and Obi-Wan accidentally triggers the catalyst, but somehow Obi-Wan doubts he will listen. This, more than anything, instills a steely core in Obi-Wan. He will not allow his Padawan to come to harm. Obi-Wan's eyes are closed, brow tightly furrowed in concentration, when he finally spots it, buried deep in the space between Shmi's lower ribs. He inhales, makes a deep incision with the knife Anakin hands him, and carefully begins to disentangle the small knot of catalyst from the chip. There are 5 components to the chip, all tightly intertwined. There is the tracker and the communications array connected to the transmitter in Watto's shop, but then there is also the trigger, the catalyst, and the oxidizer that make up the explosive component. Under normal circumstances, the trigger would activate the catalyst, sparking a small reaction that would engulf the oxidizer and start a much, much larger explosion that would kill Shmi. They have disabled the trigger component, but to truly make the chip harmless, they must separate the catalyst and the oxidizer. However, while the trigger is gone, Obi-Wan has to take care not to accidentally set off the catalyst as he removes it. Carefully, micrometer by micrometer, he begins to lift the catalyst off the chip, directing it through Shmi's body to the opening he's made. It reminds him a lot of the early control exercises Yoda used to lead the Crushlings in, using the Force to lift increasingly heavier objects in increasingly complicated patterns. Obi-Wan had never been very good at those exercises. Once they had moved onto very heavy objects, he simply didn't have the power. But he had always excelled in the control component, able to manipulate his designated piece in complex choreographies, which he decides is very fortunate given the current circumstances. He falters for a moment, the Force slipping from his grasp, but then Anakin is there in the back of his mind, curled around their bond and feeding little drips and drabs of power to him. Obi-Wan grits his teeth and refocuses his efforts. After what feels like hours, but is more likely minutes, the catalyst worms free of Shmi with a sickening squelch and floats gently onto a plate set aside for that very purpose. Obi-Wan mops at the sweat covering his brow, smiles victoriously, and then collapses to the ground completely exhausted. "Master!" Anakin cries, jumping forward. He kneels down by Obi-Wan's side. "I may have," Obi-Wan says, panting as if he has run several hundred kilometers, "overextended myself." Shmi rolls off the table and quickly grabs the plate with catalyst on it, burying the menace in a pre-dug hole in the corner of her quarters. She slaps on a back the patch that Obi-Wan insisted she use. "If they see your scar, they'll know what we did," and slips a rough cotton shift over her bare chest, hurrying over to them.
"Come, Annie, we must get him to the pallet and prepare some water,"
she says in her confident, no-nonsense way. Anakin helps his mother with these tasks, worry boring across the bond the entire time. "Hush, dear one," Obi-Wan slurs, patting at Anakin's forearm. "I will not die. I simply have a terrible case of Force exhaustion." "That's the thing you and the healers warned me about when I first started training, right?" Anakin says. Obi-Wan nods. When Anakin had first come to the temple, the healers had been very worried Anakin, unused to consciously tapping into his connection to the Force, would hit his limit and push himself past the brink. Obi-Wan had been very keen to follow their instructions, strictly limiting how many hours a day Anakin could train. For whatever reason, probably because no one really truly understood the extent of Anakin's power, his Padawan had never actually encountered that limit, taking to Force training like a duck to water. "Yes, and must this be a lesson to you? Do not ever do what I just did," Obi-Wan warns him sternly, or as sternly as he is able, with all of his muscles shaking like a tree in the wind, and him barely able to keep upright. Anakin nods and passes Obi-Wan a glass of water flavored with some sweet, powdery electrolyte mix. "Shmi!" he protests, knowing how expensive such things must be at Tatooine.
"Nonsense," Shmi says, waving a hand. "You are in this state because of me, and you must recover your strength as soon as possible."
Obi-Wan briefly considers protesting further, but instead begins greedily gulping at the water. Shmi nods once in satisfaction. Anakin looks torn for a moment, reluctant to leave Obi-Wan's side, but Obi-Wan smiles kindly and prods him across the bond. "Do not worry," he reassures Anakin. "You will have plenty of time to fuss over me during the journey back to Coruscant. Take what time you have with her, so that you are ready when we must take our leave." Anakin nods and slowly shuffles over to his mother's side. He still glances over to Obi-Wan every now and then, as if to check that he hasn't somehow managed to sneak out of the tiny hut without Anakin noticing. Obi-Wan is somewhat gratified that his Padawan thinks so highly of his skills as to think he could manage such a feat even in this state. Obi-Wan makes sure to offer a reassuring smile each and every time he catches his Padawan's eyes, a small bubble of warmth blossoming in his chest at this visible sign of Anakin's care and concern. "Oh, that's what Shmi meant!" Obi-Wan is so screwed.